Thank you. Moving to the next meeting then, which is our regular meeting of the Board of Directors of the Alameda County Water District. Roll call, please.
Director Sethi,
Here.
Akbari,
Here.
Gunther,
Here.
Huang, here, and Weed.
Here. We're consecutive meetings, so I think we can pass on the salute, again, repeating the salute to the flag, and go into public comments. Is there anyone who wishes to address the board on an item which is not on our agenda for this evening? Please raise your hand. I see no hands raised, so let us then, and I assume moderator has seen none. So then let us close public comments and move into the consent calendar. Is there a motion to add items to the consent calendar?
I'll make the motion to add items 5.1 through 5.5 to the consent calendar.
Do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Directors Sethi,
Yes.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang, aye, and Weed.
Aye.
President,
Do a
we,
motion for approval of these, of the consent calendar as amended.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Directors Sethi,
Yes.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang, aye, and Weed.
Aye.
President Weed, I recognize almost all of our attendees, but not everyone. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just do some very brief housekeeping remarks.
Please.
That way we can ensure that everybody understands how they can communicate with the board. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ed Stevenson. I serve as the district's general managers. And anybody from the public who would like to participate in this meeting can participate either by the Zoom application or by telephone. And all of the materials that we'll talk about this evening have been posted on ACWD's website at acwd.com. If you are participating via Zoom, we ask that all participants mute their microphones unless they're speaking. You may also be placed on mute by the district secretary. In Zoom, you'll be able to view the presentation materials as they are presented to the board. At any time, you may submit a question or raise your hand in the Zoom app. If you're participating by telephone, we ask that you put your phone on mute. Again, you may view the meeting agenda, the staff reports, presentation materials. They've all been posted on the district's website at acwd.org, and you can follow along that way. And if you are participating by telephone, you can use your dial pad, *6 to mute or unmute, and *9 to raise your hand. Those participating by telephone will also be given opportunities to address the board. This Zoom meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. The board will be working through a very full agenda this evening, including 2 closed session items that will be covered near the end of the meeting. While the board convenes privately in closed session, members of the public may remain logged into Zoom or stay on the phone to be informed of board reports once the closed sessions are concluded. Again, thank you for your attendance and your participation. And President Weed, that concludes my housekeeping remarks.
Thank you. I would note on our regular schedule, we have several items. So we do have in the prior session, which immediately preceded this, we discussed a bond issuance, which we approved. We have to take formal action on that, and we do have counsel online. So if I were to, with the agreement of without objection of the board, take item 5.8, which is adoption of a resolution authorizing the execution and delivery of an installment, strike that. I said installment purchase contract and its continuing disclosure agreement and an official statement of the 2022 water systems revenue bond and approving the sale of such bonds and related actions. And that will allow one of our consultants to lead, or 2 of them maybe. So, Mr. Stevenson,
At the board's pleasure, we can certainly move that item up in the agenda. I think it might be appropriate to hear from any members of the public that may want to comment on that.
in general, we're looking at a $70 million bond issuance for approximately 20 years, of which $29 million approximately is new money, and the remainder is a refinancing of other, hopefully higher interest rate debt. Is there any public comment at all on this item? March 22nd is the anticipated date of bid. Okay, that being the case, is there any need for additional staff report, given that we just had a in-depth session on this a few minutes ago?
Yeah, I don't think there's a need for additional staff report. It conforms to the report and action just taken in the prior meeting, but I would read out the recommendation.
Please.
The recommendation is by motion, adopt a resolution authorizing the execution and delivery of an installment purchase contract, a continuing disclosure agreement, an escrow agreement, and the distribution of a preliminary official statement and official statement in connection with water system revenue bonds, and approving and directing the sale and approving the publication of a notice of intention to sell relating to the water system revenue bonds, and authorizing the distribution of an official notice of sale for the purchase of such bonds and related actions.
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
I'll move staff recommendation.
Second,
I'll second.
roll call, please.
Director Sethi? Director Sethi?
You're muted, Paul.
Yeah, sorry. Yes.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther?
Aye.
Huang?
Aye.
And Weed?
Aye. Now I'd like to thank Kevin Savelli and Darren Hodge for your participation and support in this effort. You're welcome to stay. Next item is we have a resolution honoring Tracy Fung on her retirement from the district. And I know Tracy is with us, so.
Thank you,
Mr.
President
Stevenson?
Lee. Yeah, so this item will be introduced by Mr. Awoke, our Director of Engineering and Technology. But I wanted to make a couple of quick remarks about Tracy before turning the item over to Groom. So Tracy and I have worked together closely for over 16 years, and all of her time here at ACWD. And Tracy supported me directly for 6 years in my role as department head. But Tracy also spent her career here assisting and supporting many others as well. Tracy and her team support 6 divisions and 2 departments, and have been on the front lines assisting customers, developers, engineers, contractors, and the district's customers in the conduct of district business. I just wanted to extend my personal thanks to Tracy for her friendship, for all of her dedication and selfless support for me, for the district, and for all of our customers. And I also want to express our appreciation to her family, her husband Greg, and her 2 boys, Trevor and Justin, for lending Tracy to us for all of these long years that she has put in over her time here at ACWD. Tracy has been a huge asset to ACWD and a big reason that we've been so successful here. And I really, really appreciate her service here at ACWD. Thank you for allowing me to make those remarks. Now I'll pass the item over to Mr. Awoke.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, President Weed, Vice President Sethi, and board members and community members. I am very pleased today to, pleased to say her name and indicate her presence in the meeting, but of course, sad to see her go. Tracy Fung has been with the district for almost 16 years. She's been a great asset, not only to the Engineering and Technology Services Department, but for the Water Resources Department that she supported for those many years. And she's been very well liked and appreciated by many in the district. And we are all sad to see her go. but she has done so many great things for the department, for the district, and I think it's time for her to enjoy, the time with her family and her friends. Some of the major accomplishments that Tracy is well known for in the district include streamlining processes. As you might know, SharePoint is a system that we adopted more than 5 years ago. Tracy was on the forefront, making sure that we are all well positioned, as a department, as an agency, to be well versed in the use of electronic systems and document management systems. And her legacy will live on in terms of the SharePoint system that she helped implement for the district. She has been a part of the management team for these many years, and she's brought on employees and trained and brought up to speed so many new employees. And she was in the process of doing that as she decided to retire. And I can't thank her enough for, spending time and energy and effort to make this department a very well functioning one, and creating those relationships with other departments and other agencies to make ACWD really a great place to work and be a part of. With that, I will turn it over. I see Tracy is in the audience. I will turn it over to see if she would have any words to share with the board. And Tracy, it's all yours.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to share some thoughts. I've been serving as the office supervisor for both the Engineering and Technology Services Department and the Water Resources Department for the past 15 plus years. Bob Shaver hired me in 2006, and it's been my honor to work directly for him, as well as Stephen N., Laura Heides, Ed Stevenson, and Jerome Awoke. It's really been a privilege to work with these really exceptional managers, and I'm grateful to have been a team member on their management teams. And I would like to mention the members of those management teams because they've been my peers, and I've been so lucky to be part of 2 management teams. Those members include names that you'll recognize because they have presented in front of the board. Michelle Myers, Junie Rotter, Kit Sue, Thomas Neisser, Leonard Ash, Stephanie Nevins, Ariz Nakbi, Michael Shaw, Reka Ipaguta, Chris Delp, and Ben Egger. They're all very smart, dedicated, hardworking supervisors and division managers, and it's really been fantastic to be on teams with them. Really, there's so many wonderful employees here, and I've really enjoyed working alongside so many of them as colleagues. There's just too many to name, but I did want to say that it's exciting to work with other people who bring their expertise, their problem solving, and their passion to make a difference through the work that we do together. So many of them, you probably won't hear their names until you read their retirement resolutions someday. But I wanted to acknowledge that there are so many talented people here at the district, and I'm grateful to work with so many individuals. To that end, I'd actually like to share my very deep appreciation for my past and my present administrative team members. That includes Marion Chu, who is now the Assistant District Secretary and monitoring our meeting tonight. Janine Manville, Christine Santiago, Maggie Leong, Tina Nguyen, and J.R. Salinas. These are all administrative professionals who have made my job as an office supervisor so meaningful and fulfilling, because working together, we got to realize the dream of creating a very cohesive, highly skilled, service-oriented team. Christina Urenu, who has already been at the district for 18 years, has now taken over the helm, and I have every confidence that that legacy will continue. I wished her all the same growth and satisfaction that I was able to enjoy in this position. I also wanted to say thank you to you, the board members, who diligently participate in all the meetings and workshops, and who take your role so seriously as elected officials representing your constituents. Thank you for working hard together to make our mission statement a reality. We as staff do appreciate it when the board is working in unison. Thank you for considering and supporting staff recommendations on projects and agreements. And thank you for supporting executive staff when they make suggestions about benefits and improvements that help create a work environment to retain and attract high caliber employees. I am not only an employee and a soon-to-be retiree, but I'm also a ratepayer. So may I encourage you to continue to work together towards what is in the best interests of the district. And I want to say thank you so much for doing such a good job choosing our general managers. I'd actually like to say something about Ed Stevenson. I've worked with Ed my entire career here, first as a management team member and then as my direct manager. I've been able to watch him make the transition first from development services manager to the formation of the engineering and technology services department, and now as the general manager. It's pretty amazing to see him rise to these challenges and see how his core values come out in everything he does. Ed is completely committed and engaged in working on so many issues that face the district. I really appreciate his integrity, the way he leads by example, how he's always encouraging us to wear the white hat and go the second mile, his ability to understand big picture issues and the details that make up those issues, his incredible capacity for retaining data and making connections, the courage to make tough decisions, and especially his personal integrity and caring heart. Ed, I would like to thank you for being a great boss, a leader, and someone I can very much respect and follow. It was my pleasure to support you, and I wish you even more courage, clarity, patience, and stamina as you continue to lead the district into the future. Thank you so much for your commitment and dedication to the mission of the district and to the employees who make up the district. Most importantly, I'd like to acknowledge the support and love of my husband, Greg, and our two boys, Trevor and Justin. They knew that my work was important to me and to others, and they supported me by understanding that I needed to devote a lot of effort here. I would not have been able to have had such a fulfilling job and have been able to have left such a legacy here if it weren't for them. So I wanted to publicly thank them. In closing, ACWD has been a wonderful place to work, not just because our work is meaningful in supporting the community that we live in, but because really great people work here. Many people are like family to me. It has been a very worthwhile place to spend my time and energy, and I appreciate the opportunity of being able to contribute here. I will greatly miss the people and working at the district. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone attending the meeting that would like to make a comment? Do not see any hands being raised, so let us then bring it to the senior staff. Is there anyone on the senior staff would like to make comment, then bring it to the board? Okay, then to the board members, which Director Wong, or do you?
I guess I will start. So Tracy, my goodness, I am not quite sure what to say, but I will start with saying it's always my belief you and your team are the stitches that hold the fabric of ACWD together. I know you gave a lot of people credit. They are the brilliant minds that we see, but it is you and your team behind them, supporting them, that holds everything together and make sure everything runs smoothly. Thank you.
Thank you.
You don't get a lot of credit, but we appreciate it. And that's same to your family, to Greg and your children. We took a lot of your time because of your dedication to the ACWD family and to ACWD's customers. We really, really appreciate that. And last point, when I saw the agenda, the fact that you're retiring, the first thing come to mind is your smile. We don't get to interact a lot in terms of board meeting, direct presentations, but every time I see you at the district or at events, summer picnic, You always have a great smile, a wonderful personality. You always brightened up my day whenever I see you. There's always a big smile for me. It just makes everything so much better. Thank you very much. Have a great time in your retirement. Go on great adventure with your husband and children. And just remember, come back and visit us in the board meetings. You are one of our customers. Keep us honest. And I look forward to an opportunity to chat with you in the summer picnic and the winter events. Have a great time. Have fun. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Gunther, you have taken your mute off, please.
Yeah, I'll go ahead next. Tracy, you said a lot of very nice things about the staff and others. You left out one name, and that was your own. Thank you so much. Yes, you're one of those great people too. And your service is well recognized and well appreciated. And I wish you good luck out in retirement, and do hope to see you some other times around. Good luck. Thank you so much for your time here, and do well and enjoy your retirement. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Akbari?
Well, Tracy, these moments are always very bittersweet because as colleagues, we hate to see you go, but we're always very excited to watch you on your next journey. I'd love to know from you, what are you most excited about in retirement?
Oh.
Putting you on the
A
spot.
little bit. A lot of people have said to me, oh, wow, now you get to do whatever you want. And I have to say that, it's just a different focus at this stage in life. I want to say that my time at the district was doing something I wanted to do. So I guess the easiest thing is that this week I didn't have to get out of bed right away when the alarm went off. That was awesome. But on a bigger scale, it's just time to spend more time with family and friends. And we have a pretty big house remodel coming up.
Lovely. Well, we're wishing you all the best. And I'm very happy to hear that you're also a ratepayer. So I am expecting you at our next few meetings. We want to hear from you, but really, really appreciate your service, not just to the district, but to the community overall. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Dr. Sethi?
Yes. Tracy, it's been a real joy to be around you and work with you, not only while I've been on the board, but prior to being on the board. And I'd like to share one story quickly. About 2 years before I was on the board, I was asking a lot of questions of Bob Shaver, and he invited me in to sit down with him to help me out. And the next thing I knew, Tracy was coordinating a meeting of the entire senior staff, including Walt Wadlow. And I walked into the engineering conference room and I go, "What's going on?" And Walt said, "We think you're going to be here for a long time to come." And I say, "How do you know that?" And Tracy was the coordinator of pulling together the entire senior staff. And I will say this, that from time to time, I like to wander the water district, and I've been in the engineering department a couple times when Bob and Ed were not there. And you're the first to step up and say, "Director Sethi, how can I help you?" And so I appreciate you. I see Laura Rodellis is retiring tonight too. But you and Gina and Marianne and Laura, you're the people who hold the water district together. And in a final comment, I will say, I remember your father very fondly. He was a contemporary of my father in the water industry, and I always loved speaking to him and learning from everything that he had to offer from his perspective in the water industry. So I know it's in your family, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much.
And Tracy, thank you for what you and your family have done for our district. Part of the strength and endurance of the ACWD, and for training at least the last 2 general managers.
Thank you.
Keep putting them in. It's a great service for the district as a whole. So we owe you a great deal. And thank you and best wishes in the future. And you're certainly welcome to come back to any of our meetings. So thank you.
Very much.
And also when we get the picnics reestablished.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
President, if there are no further, my apologies. Go ahead, Director Wong.
No, I was going to move staff recommendation, but would you like to read it out?
Yeah, I'm gonna read the recommendation. So the
Right.
recommendation is by motion, adopt the resolution honoring Tracy Fung and expressing appreciation for her 2 years of dedicated service with the district.
Thank you. We have a motion.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Moved by Director Wong, second by Director Gunther. Roll call, please.
Director Sethi,
Aye. Yes, I approve.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tracy.
Next, we have our 5th public hearing to receive public input on the transition from at-large to zone-based elections and consider adoption of an ordinance approving the change from at-large to zone-based elections for election of members of the Board of Directors commencing in November 2002. And I have a script that was prepared for me given the legality of this process and the needs of coverage. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this public hearing to continue the district's process of transitioning from at-large to zone-based elections. At this public hearing, the district's demographers will present draft voting district zone maps and potential election sequencing and receive input from the public. Following the public hearing, the board will consider adopting an ordinance establishing a final voting district zone map and sequence of elections. The board welcomes your input into this important process. And again, thank you for your participation. Now let us review the ground rules, and it'll really subject to the number of people who will be participating. I will open the public hearing and the ACWD staff will make some brief remarks, followed by a presentation from the district's demographers to share the draft zone maps currently under consideration. The presentation materials can be viewed online through a Zoom app or can be accessed on the district's website with the agenda and materials for the meeting at www.acwd.org. Upon conclusion of the presentation, the board and the district's demographers will receive public comments and input. Upon conclusion of the public comments and input, the board will request input from staff, general counsel, and the district's demographers as needed to respond to questions or comments that were raised by the public. I will then close the public hearing. If you wish to speak, and these are speaker requests, please indicate by raising your hand. There's a button on the bottom tray of your Zoom app. And submitting your comments or questions in chat under the chat feature of Zoom, or by speaking up verbally when we open the public comments portion of the hearing. When making public comments, be sure to unmute your own phone line or computer microphone so that you may be heard. We ask that you please state your name and service address when making a comment, although providing this information is voluntary. This time, I will open the public hearing and staff will provide some brief remarks followed by a presentation by the district demographers. And please refrain from questions until the appropriate time. Mr. Stevenson?
Thank you, President Weed, and Ms. Sue. As Dr. Labkoff shares her screen, I'll make a few introductory remarks. So before we begin, I'd like to just let all the attendees know that the district has been in the process of conducting a series of 5 public hearings to receive public input through its transition from at-large to zone-based elections. The district has already held the first of 4 public hearings regarding the transition process, the communities of interest, reviews of the draft zone maps. And at this 5th and final scheduled public hearing, the remaining draft maps, including the potential boundaries of the 5 proposed zones for voting district zones, will be presented and the public input will be sought regarding configuration of those zones and the communities of interest, as well as proposed sequence of elections. As President Weed indicated, after the conclusion of the public hearing, the board will be presented with an ordinance to adopt the final zone map and the sequence of elections. If adopted, the final voting district zone map and sequence of elections will be submitted to the Alameda County Registrar of Voters for use in elections for the District Board of Directors beginning in November of 2022 and continuing every 2 years thereafter. To develop the voting district zone maps, the district has engaged a demographer who has participated in the prior public hearings and received input and feedback from the public and from the board, and we welcome that feedback. The draft voting district zone maps to be presented this evening were posted to the district's website on January 28th, and the district published notice of this public hearing on its website and social media, and in the Argus on February 25th, and in the Tri-City Voice on February 22nd and March 1st. So at this time, I'd like to introduce the district's demographer, Dr. Shelley Labkoff of Labkoff and Gobelet Demographic Research, who will present and describe the draft maps for consideration. So Dr. Labkoff, it's all yours.
Good. This is our 5th public hearing, and excuse me for a minute. Our 5th public hearing. And we're in the home stretch right now. So I'll be presenting tonight. This is an agenda for the evening, a summary of the process we've been through, a comparison of the plans. I'll discuss other information that we have gathered since the last meeting. We will take a special look at Plan 3, which is what the directors have favored so far. I'll suggest a sequence of elections and make recommendation. And if there's a request, I have more detail in the appendix that I could review. So a summary of the process. On August 12th, the board passed a resolution to transition to by-district elections. There were 2 pre-map meetings, one on October 11th and the other on October 28th. After the holidays, we came back on January 13th with maps, 5 maps that the board considered. At the February 17th meeting, the board reviewed 3 of those maps because they had removed 2 of those maps at the prior meeting. And here we are on March 10th, we are going to consider those 3 maps again. And it is now available for the board of directors to adopt a final plan and a sequence of election. So since the last meeting, we have investigated a lot of information that is on the website and available to the directors. you'd asked me to look at other jurisdictional boundaries to see if that might affect some tweaking to the plans, refinements to the plans, especially Plan 3, but also I looked at Plans 1 and 2. The other jurisdictional boundaries that I looked at did not suggest any tweaking to those plans. We looked at the Fremont City Council districts, the Fremont Unified Trustee areas. We looked at the Union Sanitary District. You'd also asked me about the Ohlone trustee areas, but I was unable to get those. And I think they are still, possibly they are still under consideration and they haven't decided on their plan, as best I can tell. In addition to looking at other jurisdictional boundaries, you asked for other information such as household income, to look at household income and how that is spread throughout, distributed throughout the district. We also looked at the meters, multi-meters and single family meters, and then also seismic data. And none of that data suggested a change in the maps that we had provided to you earlier. And then finally, I took a very close look at Plan 3 to see if there was any other change that I would recommend. And there isn't any other change that I could see to make that plan better. There's really a trade-off between attendance areas and neighborhoods. If you want to keep the integrity of an attendance area, sometimes it does not correspond to a neighborhood. So it's really a matter of choosing which kind of boundaries you want to follow. Now I'll do a quick comparison of plans. This is Plan 1. And the main difference between these plans 1, 2, and 3 are the dividing lines between districts 3 and 4 and between 4 and 5. And Plan 1 uses major streets. That was the idea behind Plan 1. Use major streets that are highly identifiable by the public. That was Plan 1. Plan 2 was to use official neighborhood boundaries in the city of Fremont. And that suggested somewhat different boundaries and sometimes not using major roads. And then finally, there was Plan 3 that was requested by the board to look at elementary attendance areas. And they suggested slightly different lines and boundary lines between districts 3 and 4 and between 4 and 5. And I guess I should back up and just for the public say, District 1 is the city limits of Union City. And District 2 is Newark and includes all the area west of 880. So that is pretty much the same in all 3 plans. Though we do follow some neighborhood boundaries, it doesn't affect very many people in Plan 2, so that's a little different. But basically, it's the same. Districts 1 and 2 are virtually the same in all 3 plans. And if you wanted to compare them side by side, here is one slide that you can look at all 3 of them in one place. One thing that I'll say about Plan 3 is that for the most part, it does follow major streets, even though it divides a few neighborhoods. Now looking more precisely at Plan 3, I'd actually want to go to this slide, which overlays the attendance areas on Plan 3. And you can see that in most cases, they nicely follow the attendance area boundaries. So there's just a few that are split, like Parkmont is split here. But for the most part, they are following the elementary attendance area boundaries. So the extent that people are familiar with their attendance areas, their elementary attendance areas, then they would be familiar with these boundaries. Now, just going up, you can see that here is an overlay of the neighborhoods in Fremont. And you can see that the Irvington neighborhood is split, for example, in Plan 3. But you can't have it both ways, because in this scenario, the Irvington neighborhood is partly served by Durham Elementary and partly by Hirsch. So it's just a matter of, do you want to follow the neighborhood boundaries or do you want to follow the elementary school boundaries? And the same with Centerville was split. But this line follows Parkmont boundary here. So that's what I have to say about Plan 3 here. And this is the data table for Plan 3. And you may notice that overall in the city, 61% of the population is of Asian descent, 17% Hispanic or Latinx percent. In this plan, in terms of citizens of voting age, all of the districts have very high Asian CVAP, if not 50%, close to 50%. And the overall plan deviation is 6.6%, and that's under the needed 10% or less. So you're well within that range. Now, going on to the sequencing of elections, I'd suggest that districts 2 and 3 elect in 2022. That mirrors the incumbents who are up for re-election in 2022 and who live in districts 2 and 3. It also coincides with the districts that are the highest, District 3 has the highest Asian percentage of any of the districts, and District 2 is one of 2 high Latinx, Latino districts. So it also corresponds to that in the spirit of the California Voting Rights Act. And then districts 1, 4, and 5 would elect in 2024. Now, in terms of a recommendation, after these 5 public hearings, the recommendation would be that you make a motion and adopt an ordinance establishing a voting zone map depicting the 5 voting district zones and the sequence of elections to be used for director elections beginning in 2022 and every 2 years thereafter. So that's a recommendation. If you would like more detail about any of the plans, I'm available to do that as well. But that concludes my formal presentation.
Thank you. Strikes me at this time we open it up for public comment, if there's any member of the public who wishes to address the board on this issue. We have, are there any hands raised for this item?
I see Mr. Ken Nishimura.
Yes. Mr. Ken Nishimura, please address the board.
Thank you. Let me begin by stating my appreciation to the district staff and the demographers for providing the updated set of data requested at previous public hearings. The ability to see how potential secondary criteria could impact communities of concern is very helpful and exemplifies the effort the district is making towards transparency. In the past, I and others have indicated potential criteria for communities of concern as related to a water district could include geographic variations in water quality due to the various sources of water in the distribution system, geographic variations in the impacts of potential natural disasters to the water system, geographic variations in the distribution of class of customer, that is single family homes versus multifamily versus industrial or small business. And finally, geographic variations in socioeconomic factors. Finally, several have opined on the desire to align our zones with existing boundaries for our other elected positions. The differences between the three proposals are slight. Zones 1 and 2 remain unchanged between the proposals, leaving the boundaries between zones 3 through 5 as the focus of attention. The proposed zones all divide the region comprising zones 3 through 5 in an east-west direction, resulting in a northern, middle, and southern portion of much of Fremont. Interestingly, much of the variations in the criteria I mentioned earlier tend to align orthogonally with the proposed zone boundaries. That is, if these criteria were primary factors, it would make more sense to have the zone boundaries run north-south rather than east-west. Thus, determining which plan best addresses these proposed secondary criteria becomes difficult. I then turn back to the major differences between the plans, and I'm drawn to the Canyon Heights area, specifically the area east of Mission Boulevard, south of Niles Canyon, which resides within Zone 4 in Plans 1 and 2, but moves to Zone 5 in Plan 3. Mission Boulevard is a major thoroughfare which divides Canyon Heights from Niles. It seems that there would be more common community by keeping the sections east of Mission together as in Plans 1 and 2. The areas east of Mission share similar seismic risks. They are also at higher elevation. Therefore, should the district ever consider pressure zone-based pricing, the areas east of Mission would share a common concern. The area in question is also mostly comprised of single meters, which appears to align better with Zone 4 than Zone 5. Although the proposals are quite similar and the differences between them correspondingly small, given the choice, I would opt for Plan 1, which utilizes major streets, with the neighborhood-based Plan 2 a close second. I'll close by concurring with the recommendation to begin implementation of this zone-based selection in 2022, starting with zones 2 and 3, and then following with the remaining zones in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there any other member of the public who would like to speak to the board or provide input by chat? I see none. As staff indicated, any hands raised that I might have missed? If not, then we can close the public hearing and bring it back to the board.
Just to confirm, I don't believe there have been any written comments, but we should check to confirm that if there have been any written comments submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. In coordinating with Ms. Sue just recently, it doesn't look like there have been any other written comments, but Ms. Sue, can you just confirm?
There have been no other written comments. Thanks.
Okay,
Thank you. So now let us have input from members of the board on the three maps that are going forward. And I'd make a comment that I would hope that tonight we can settle on a map. I think that would be the intent and proceed. I have a question of the demographer before we start. Have we received any input at all from the registrar of voters on this process? And when might we get that input on the ability for them to conduct the elections?
I sent email to them very shortly after our last meeting, but I have not heard back from them at all. And I don't expect to. I just haven't gotten much feedback from the Alameda Register of Voters for the various clients we've had in Alameda County. So I just don't expect them to. I think the Register of Voters sees their job as implementing the plan that you would choose.
All right. So they can basically object if they have a real problem, but they have not identified one yet and they're aware of it. So that's good. Thank you. So to members of the board, who would like to speak first? If there's no other comment, if no one wishes to address the presentation before, I would note that I would prefer Plan 3. That school districts, so when they develop the elementary school boundaries, do their best not to cross major thoroughfares because the students have to get to and from school. And therefore you fall into, as it was noted, this experience where the school district boundaries are in alignment with the major roadways. And it truly is the fabric of a bedroom community, which Fremont and Newark, Union City are. So, and in real estate, when someone buys a home, one thing they make sure to tell you is what schools your house is, what district you're in, what attendance area. So my experience in town meetings, when they ask for community leaders, they go to the head of the local PTAs. And the number of elementary schools in the area determines the number of community leaders. There may be another odd or two people, but that seems to be a universal theme. So do we need to, is it appropriate to form a motion on this item?
I would ensure that any other director who would like to speak has that opportunity, and then someone could make a motion. Again, we have two items that we need to confirm. One is which plan the board would like to move forward with, and also the sequence of elections. And what you saw in the presentation was a recommendation related to districts 2 and 3 electing in 2022, and districts 1, 4, and 5 electing in 2024.
I suggest we take the second item first, because that is fairly straightforward. We have a certain sequence of elections, and I have not heard of anyone wishing to change the date at which they come up for re-election, expedited.
So if I could chime in, President Weed, what we've got before you in your agenda pack is an ordinance that actually encompasses everything. So the board action would be to adopt the ordinance, and we will plug in the information into the ordinance, including the sequence of election, and when the board decides which plan it would like us to insert, we'll do that, and then the formal board action would be to adopt the ordinance.
Okay. Well, we have a draft ordinance. Is there anyone who wishes to make a motion for a specific plan, and as part of that motion to maintain the current sequence of elections and dates?
Director Weed, I have a question regarding process, I guess. I'm okay with choosing a plan this evening. What would be the ramifications if we fail to choose a plan this evening? As District Council.
So the board certainly doesn't need to take action tonight. You could defer action if you needed to. The deadline is, I believe we need to submit our map by April 17th. And so that's the drop dead date for the board to actually take action on choosing a plan, and so we can submit those plans to the Register of Voters.
Okay.
A personal thought is that given the large number of plans that are going to be coming to the Registrar of Voters, being in the early part of that presentation would be helpful. And the sooner we can solidify it, I believe, I'll see it on to the other business of the district.
Well, I guess I'll speak then on Plan 3. I do like the concept of the school district boundaries. I did hear what Mr. Nishimura had to say, and yes, while I tend to agree, I really strongly feel the school district boundaries are a really good basis to work with, particularly because they tend also to change with population. And I think will assist us 10 years from now in when we have to do this again. And so I'm willing to draw maps based on the elementary school boundaries. It's really, ultimately, it looks like Fremont's the problem. The Newark area and Ardenwood is pretty well covered. Union City's covered. And I'm very satisfied with how those line up. And I think the members of the communities there would be as well. So it comes down to Fremont. And in previous meetings, we've talked about fabric of PTAs and school districts. And I agree. I think they are pretty strong feelings in the residents. They're strong bases. They're really, John, you mentioned for real estate. Absolutely. So I'm perfectly fine with map 3. And I think that would also 10 years from now give us some basis if we have to readjust, which we probably will, following potential school district boundaries. Thank you.
Director Sethi here. I concur with Director Gunther's comments, and I also will add, I think it's the most balanced of all of the maps that we've looked at. And I also sincerely want to thank our demographers for helping to better educate all of us on our constituencies and the demographics of our community. I learned a lot through the process, and I thank you for that.
Dr. Corey, did you have a?
Yeah, I'll add it. Well, like Director Sethi mentioned, I really appreciate the work that staff and our demographers have put in. It's been a very, very eye-opening process, that's for sure. In previous public hearings, I've noted that I had few issues with maps 1, 2, and 3, and like was mentioned, the differences between the 3 maps are fairly minute. There's definitely, I think, a board consensus around, or at least we've heard from 3 directors around map 3, and I'm happy to support map 3 as well tonight. And for the election sequence, I'm happy with that as well.
Thank you, Director Wall.
Yeah, so actually, same here. First of all, thank you to staff and our demographer for providing the additional overlays. I was the one that called for Plan 1 and 2 to be carried over from the last workshop, just so that we could address our customers' concerns. So thank you for doing that. I'm still in the same spot, even with the additional overlay. All 3 plans meet the requirement of CVRA and do not have very strong preference between them. I will say, just based on number and statistics, Plan 3 actually has the best number per CVRA. I am definitely willing to go with majority of the board. Although I will say I am sympathetic to perhaps jiggle the line so north of, I guess it's technically east of Mission, would stay together because they do have unique issues versus rest of Niles. But I think I would have to have faith at whichever director that end up with that district would adequately and very well ably represent the customers, even in the Kenyon Heights area. So I'm fine with Plan 3 if that's the majority of board's wish. In terms of the election sequence, I am totally fine with it.
I have a question for Mr. Stevenson, please.
Sure.
So early on in the process here, I think at least last summer, I inquired about Union Sanitary District and whether they were moving to districting. And I know that you met with the general manager over there, and I talked to 2 board members, and in each case we got an ambivalent answer. This was the first presentation set of materials that I've seen where explicitly there are districts drawn out for Fremont for Union Sanitary. And I would like to know a little bit more about the background to what led to this, if they were given a threatening letter also from Shankman or some other law firm. But how did we end up suddenly becoming aware of the fact that Union Sanitary is going to districts, and they have 3 seats up for election this June, all in the Fremont area.
Yeah, and maybe I can just confirm, USD has they've already been districted, and they already elect by zone. And so what you saw this evening was the zones that already exist. And so those are the zones that apply to USD now and going forward. So those are the correct zones for USD.
Well, my understanding was that the 3 Fremont directors ran at large for the city of Fremont. I did not know that there were defined districts. So is this something new, or it's pre-existing?
The zones that are shown there are pre-existing, and they are what's in effect now. And so I'm not sure about how run in the past, but that's what's current.
Could we see, before we pass this ordinance, just for benefit of the public and board members, a side-by-side of the map 3 for ACWD versus the USD districting?
I think Ms. Labkoff could pull up her presentation again and
Yes.
show those.
Do that. So this wasn't in the formal presentation, but this is what was sent out earlier, or is on the website. And it's my understanding that they only have 3 zones. So the pink reddish color is Fremont, most of Fremont, and maybe 3 directors are being elected from that large zone. I don't know if I'm not quite clear on that, but it seemed that way. So that this whole area would get is 1 zone, and all 3 board members come from there. That would correspond to Director Sethi's belief that they run at large for Fremont. And then here's Union City, and then Newark. But Newark would also include, isn't Ardenwood right here? So it wouldn't be all of Fremont.
So are they still running at large for Fremont?
It's sort of a mixed system. They have 3 zones, but maybe 3 directors are in 1 zone.
So what do the division lines represent in District 3, the pink area?
So that would be where presumably the 3 directors have to live in this area, and only people who live in this area would be able to elect them. And if that's what they're doing, that is subject to a CVRA letter, right? Because that doesn't satisfy the California Voting Rights Act.
So what are the segmentation lines? What is the reason for those segmentation lines in the pink area? Is that an overlay?
So the overlay is Plan 3. This is your Plan 3. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, that's your Plan 3.
Minus the area west of 880 in the pink area.
Right, right.
So Paul, it looks like you're correct that they have 3 at large in that pink zone. Which means they're not districted.
Right. So they are, as you're pointing out, they are still subject to a CVR challenge in some way.
Yes.
Okay.
I had another school district that got a CVRA letter, and they had 3 trustee areas and multiple trustees in each trustee area. They were 7 district board and they just got challenged.
Mhm.
So it's definitely, they're definitely at risk of that.
If I could chime in real quick, please,
Yeah.
as general counsel. I think the purpose of looking at the USD boundary was to see if there were any tweaks that were needed to the ACWD Plan 3 map or any of the other maps. And we should probably focus on the ACWD plans and the ACWD maps and use the other information as comparison because that was the intent of that information. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Here, I was confused because I thought maybe they had gone to 5 zones, and I was trying to compare their 5 zones to what we would end up with on map 3. So thank you for all the clarification, and we can move on.
Thank you. All right, then. So I think I'm the last to speak. I support Plan 3. And do we have a motion to support the resolution?
Yeah, President Weed, if I could just read the
Please.
staff recommendations specifically so we all know what we're considering here. So staff's recommendation based upon this discussion is to, by motion, adopt an ordinance establishing the voting zone map number 3 or plan number 3, depicting the 5 voting district zones and the sequence of elections to be used for director elections beginning in 2022 and every 2 years thereafter. That sequence being districts number 2 and 3 elect in 2022 and districts number 1 and 4 and 5 elect in 2024.
I will move the staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any additional comment by members of the board? There being none, roll call, please.
Director Sethi,
Yes.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther, Quam,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. Thank you. So the other districts have found this to be a far more tenuous process. So it was wonderful work by the staff, and Shelley, thank you very much for your help. And also the other staff members who are in support of this effort. Next would be a item 5.9, which is an authorization to implement certain COVID-19 related temporary employee benefits provided by Senate Bill 114 with certain district provided enhancements.
President Weed, we can go to 5.9 if you'd like. 5.8 would be next in the agenda, and I can just.
I thought we had taken care of that earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. Thank you. Yes, 5.9. Yes, authorization to implement certain COVID-19 related temporary employee benefits provided by Senate Bill 114 with certain district provided enhancements, and that item will be presented by our Director of Finance and Administration, Mr. John Wonderlich.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Senate Bill 114 was enacted last month and became effective February 19th. SB 114 provides up to an additional 80 hours of supplemental paid sick leave for COVID-related needs. This is similar to benefits that were legislated last year under SB 95 and applies to all eligible district employees. For SPSL provided under SB 95, the district chose to make certain enhancements to these benefits for district employees. Staff is recommending that similar enhancements be made for the new required SPSL benefits under SB 114. Approval of this item will help achieve district strategic plan goal 4, improve workforce recruitment, maintain retention, and enhance employee engagement. And so the recommendation is by motion, authorize the general manager to implement certain enhancements to the supplemental paid sick leave benefits provided under SB 114, specifically to pay the employee's regular rate of pay for leave taken under SB 114, to allow the 40 hours of leave provided under SB 114 for general COVID-19 related needs, excluding leave related solely to positive COVID-19 test results, to convert to regular sick leave if unused at the end of the benefit period, and to extend the flexibility amendments of the district's COVID-19 pandemic temporary benefits provisions policy through September 30, 2022. And just to kind of summarize a little bit more, most of the COVID-related supplemental benefits that have been provided contain limits on the amount, on the hourly rate that can be paid out for employees using those benefits. And those limitations generally are not really applicable to the Bay Area and other high cost of living areas throughout the country. So what the district has done in the past is simply pay the employees regular rate of pay when they use those benefits, similar to all other leave time. And so what I'd be happy to do now is answer any questions.
All right, first of all, are there any public comments on this item? There being none, members of the board, do you have any questions? None. Do we have a motion to adopt the resolution?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any comment by members of the board on the motion? Roll call, please.
Director Sethi,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Wong,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. Thank you. Item 5.10 is to adoption of resolutions approving amendments to the amended and restated water supply agreement between the city and county of San Francisco and the wholesale customers in Alameda County, San Mateo County, and Santa Clara County, and approving a minimum purchase transfer from the city of Mountain View to the city of East Palo Alto. Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, thank you, President Wade. And this item will be handled by our Director of Water Resources, Ms. Laura Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. This item before the board tonight includes two different approvals related to the district's water supply agreement with the city and county of San Francisco. I'm pleased to turn it over tonight to Mr. Leonard Ash, the district's water supply supervisor, who has spent many tireless hours collaborating with other stakeholders in developing these agreements. And he will be making a short presentation on this item tonight. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Ash.
All right, thank you, Ms. Heides. As mentioned, I'll be providing a high-level overview of the proposed amendments to the water supply agreement between San Francisco and wholesale customers. And I'll also describe a related second board action for consideration tonight. Next slide, please. And next one. As you may recall, the water supply agreement, or WSA, was last amended in 2018 and 2019 with various clarifications and minor improvements. The WSA describes the overall supply assurance for SFPUC to provide a certain volume of water to wholesale customers collectively. The WSA includes terms and conditions related to the individual supply guarantee, or ISG, which is the annual volume of water that each individual wholesale customer agency may purchase out of the overall supply assurance from the SFPUC's regional water system. And 24 of the 26 wholesale customer agencies have an individual supply guarantee listed in the WSA. For example, the district's ISG is about 15,400 acre feet per year. The WSA also includes conditions for agencies that have historically accessed or purchased significant water supplies from other sources. Even back in the predecessor to the WSA, in the 1984 Master Service Agreement, it included requirements on 4 wholesale customers to buy a minimum annual purchase quantity, commonly referred to in shorthand as a minimum purchase. These 4 agencies listed here either purchase a volume of at least that minimum purchase quantity, or be subject to charges equivalent to the amount as if they had purchased that volume of water. The district is one of those 4 minimum purchase wholesale customers. And our minimum purchase quantity is about 8,570 acre feet per year, which is about 56% of our ISG. These minimum purchase requirements are set forth in the WSA, and any change to the minimum purchase quantity assigned to a wholesale customer would require an amendment to the WSA, which would also require approval from the SFPUC and the requisite approval from wholesale customers. Next slide, please. Now, at the conclusion of negotiations regarding the 2018 WSA amendments, some wholesale customers expressed interest in exploring with SFPUC some further amendment that might provide an easier way for minimum purchase wholesale customers to transfer some of that minimum purchase obligation along with ISG to other wholesale customers. And in essence, that's what's set forth for your consideration today. This amendment to the WSA provides a framework, a pre-approved method that would allow for a minimum purchase wholesale customer to transfer a portion of their minimum purchase obligation, along with a transfer of ISG, to another wholesale customer. Now, the framework includes a complex series of steps and safeguards to ensure that these permanent transfers would protect the financial and water supply interests of all non-participating wholesale customer agencies. I would refer the board and the public to the February materials from the Water Resources and Conservation Committee meeting and the information referenced in the staff report for this item in the packet for this board meeting for more details on the amendment and the secondary action under consideration tonight. Next slide, please. Now, while the WSA amendment creates a framework that, if followed, would provide for the transfer of a wholesale customer's minimum purchase requirement without needing the approval of the SFPUC and other wholesale customers, the WSA amendment preserves the ability already provided in the current WSA that another type of transfer could occur outside of this framework, but that would need the requisite approval both from SFPUC and wholesale customers to become effective. The WSA amendment, again negotiated subsequent to the last drought, includes expanded language describing the circumstances under which SFPUC may waive the minimum purchase obligation during certain declared emergencies. As you know, currently, SFPUC has declared a water shortage emergency for its regional water system, and they have waived the minimum purchase requirements during this time, as is provided under the current WSA. This WSA amendment would broaden the types of conditions, such as what we saw in the last drought, to allow San Francisco to waive minimum purchase requirements when a state of emergency is declared by the governor of California that impacts water supply use or deliveries from the regional water system. And for the district, this is a positive change, as it would expand SFPUC's ability under the WSA to waive minimum purchase requirements. And lastly, the WSA amendment includes various new reporting requirements that will be necessary to monitor and track the progress of transfers among wholesale customers that would be initiated under this new framework. Next slide, please. District staff is supportive of the WSA amendment. Overall, the chief benefit of creating this framework is that it provides a streamlined pathway for an agency like the district to transfer a portion of its minimum purchase obligation. This has been a long identified constraint, and the amendment is a good first step in reducing that barrier to facilitate more water transfers among customer agencies, which in turn can help encourage and support the development of new water supplies, which would be a benefit to the entire region. This framework was developed with close involvement of the wholesale customers, and it includes many mechanisms to ensure that it is protective of the existing rights and obligations of all wholesale customers, even those wholesale customers not participating in these future transfers. I would add that the safeguards and protections in place are a result of numerous discussions and iterations facilitated by BOSCA among the wholesale customers and reflect a significant effort to get to an amendment that the wholesale customers could support. Staff sees this amendment as a significant first step, as I mentioned, to lowering the barrier for transfers of minimum purchase. Next slide, please. The WSA amendment negotiations concluded in late 2020, and the SFPUC approved the amendment package in early 2021. The next and final step is for wholesale customers to approve the WSA amendment, which is what is for consideration tonight. There is also a secondary action before the board, which is to approve of a minimum purchase transfer that was negotiated between two wholesale customers. And the terms of that negotiation are now complete, so staff is presenting these two actions together. Next slide, please. This secondary action relates to a transfer first completed in 2017, where the city of Mountain View transferred 1 MGD, about 1,100 acre-feet per year, to the city of East Palo Alto. Late last year, these two parties agreed to a new set of terms of an agreement that would pair the transfer of up to 1 MGD of Mountain View's minimum purchase requirement to East Palo Alto in quarter MGD increments that would be coupled to the ISG transferred in 2017, matching in many ways the new WSA amendment framework. It would also provide East Palo Alto with the right of first refusal for any drought water transfers, as described in the WSA, that would be offered by Mountain View. Next slide, please. Now I will review the staff recommendation, which is by motion, 1, adopt a resolution approving the 2021 amended and restated water supply agreement between the City and County of San Francisco wholesale customers in Alameda County, San Mateo County, and Santa Clara County. And 2, adopt a resolution approving a minimum purchase transfer from the City of Mountain View to the City of East Palo Alto. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Let me open it up first to see if there's any member of the public that would like to comment or ask a question on this item. Mr. Kinashamero, please.
Yes, just a quick question. I assume by transacting the proposal in front of the board that the district basically would gain future flexibility in negotiating a transfer of the minimum purchase agreement with another wholesaler, but we would not incur any liability today to give up any of our SFPUC water. Is that correct?
That is correct. This would provide a framework that would allow the district or any other minimum purchase wholesale customer to begin to negotiate with other wholesale customers under this new framework. However, it doesn't affect any fundamental rights that ACWD or any other wholesale customer has with respect to their existing commitments for water supply from SFPUC.
Okay, thank you very much.
And thank you. Are there questions or comments from members of the board?
I do have some questions here.
Yes.
So, Mr. Ash, thank you for a very nice presentation, intelligently put forward. So you mentioned that San Francisco already approved all of these amendments. Has Bosca done the same thing, or are they awaiting their approval from the different agencies that are participants in Bosca?
Well, thank you for that question, Director Sethi. It's important to note that Bosca is not a party to the existing WSA. It's an agreement between the City and County of San Francisco and the individual wholesale customers. And as the Bosca is not a signatory to the agreement, they have no action in approving the amendments that are proposed tonight.
Are there any members of Bosca that are not a participant in the new amendments?
The amendments would need to be approved by the requisite number of wholesale customers that are already party to the WSA. So that would not include Bosca or any Bosca staff or board members.
So it's been pretty clear for years what our minimum purchase is from San Francisco. But is there a limit on additional purchases or conditions on additional purchases of water?
So historically, wholesale customers in the past have purchased more water than is provided for under their ISG volumes. The ISG, individual supply guarantee, is just that. It's a guarantee to every wholesale customer of a volume of water that the PUC will provide to them for purchase. In the past, as I mentioned, if there is additional water for purchase, those additional purchases have happened. But obviously, if the system is constrained, every agency has the guarantee that that individual supply would be reserved for them.
The reason I ask is that, if I recall correctly, during the last drought, we did make some extra purchases from San Francisco, and now we're in the third year of a drought. The Hetch Hetchy system is fairly healthy compared to other water storage systems around the state. If we went into a long-term drought, can we depend upon San Francisco to provide us with additional water? That's the bottom line of my question.
So that brings up a very nuanced point. Under the water supply agreement, there are certain provisions that come into play when there is a water shortage, when there is an emergency declared by San Francisco. As you're aware, San Francisco took those unprecedented steps in November of last year. That was the first time under the current WSA where those water shortage provisions were implemented. And in that case, then there are basically additional provisions that supersede the individual supply guarantee. And it's a pretty complex series of steps, but basically there's a division of available supplies first among the retail and wholesale customers. That's called the tier 1 split. And then there's a tier 2 calculation that is managed through BOSCA that further divides the wholesale customer share among the various wholesale customers. Mm-hmm. And so in this particular situation where we are now, we're in a voluntary cutback. And so every wholesale customer has a certain volume of water that they're allocated under these cutbacks. However, there are no financial penalties under this voluntary cutback if any individual wholesale customer goes above their allocation. It is possible if the PUC went into a mandatory cutback, then those allocations become a little bit more strict. And if an individual agency goes above their agency's allocations, there are financial penalties associated with that. And again, it depends on how much water is available and what everyone's collective demands are to really get to answer your question. But it really depends, but there are some nuances in cases where there are cutbacks.
If I can make a quick clarification on what happened the last drought. In the last drought, we had a drought surcharge to purchase surplus additional San Francisco water, but none of that had to be spent because we actually purchased less than our minimum purchase requirements due to conservation, and our demands were not. So none of the $12.4 million we raised for the purchase of surplus water was spent on San Francisco water, was spent doing that.
Mr. Ash, I have one final question. We've been notified by San Francisco that the cost per acre foot is going to go up dramatically. Is there a pricing schedule that is tied to these amendments, on an annual basis moving forward?
So I think that there are two different issues there in that question. So first of all, yes, we're aware that the PUC will be raising their unit cost. They have a very different price structure than, say, the water district or many other water providers, in that they have no fixed charge. There is no sort of service charge component to purchasing water from them. So the unit cost of water will fluctuate from year to year, depending on the overall system costs compared to the volume of water that the retail and wholesale customers purchased in the prior year. They do maintain a balancing account, which is provided for in the WSA, that provides some sort of smoothing from year to year to help manage the extremes of those fluctuations. However, because of the ongoing drought, demands have decreased, and as you're aware, fixed costs for maintenance and staffing, et cetera, remain the same in drought years and not. So we have expected that even with decreased purchases, the unit costs will continue to increase, as well as other improvements that are necessary for the regional water system from a capital perspective. So there's that. For the WSA amendment tonight, there's nothing in the amendment that affects the financial or fundamental rights that would have a fundamental impact, a financial impact to the wholesale customers. So for example, I mentioned the additional reporting requirements. Those are simply to track that the transfers between the wholesale customers are in compliance, and we're tracking their progress under the various requirements set forth in the framework for a minimum purchase transfer. So there shouldn't be any financial impacts to the amendments under consideration tonight.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a recommendation for staff here related. It's been quite a while since we had a presentation on all of the work going on in the Hetch Hetchy system. We completed $5 billion worth of work on the PUC's WISP program, including close to $1 billion on Calaveras Reservoir. And I have outstanding questions as to how much is going to be required to fix the mountain tunnel, other aspects of the Hetch Hetchy system, and I think an update on what their 10-year outlook is for water system improvements on the Hetch Hetchy system would be very welcome.
Thank you. I've taken note of that. Thank you for your comment, Director Sethi.
Mhm.
I have some comments later, but do we have comments from other members of the board? All right. Well, thank Director Sethi for his points. This is a useful step in the right direction, but it's one step. Trying to get marketability is an elusive goal. With 26 members and BOSCA staff is closely monitoring this process and reports on it at each of their meetings. There is no sense of a universal fairness in the group. A lot of it depended on past water supply uses, things that were negotiated. East Palo Alto was, before incorporation, was not well represented by San Mateo County and needed more additional water. San Mateo was purchasing far more water than they could use and paying for water they weren't using. It goes on. But anything that do marketability is good. La Purisima is one small district in Los Altos Hills, Purisima, that has serious concerns about the agreement and doesn't feel that it addresses their needs. When we go into a drought, we're requested to reduce our consumption by different amounts in each district. In our case, 6 or 7%. In the case of Las Purisima, 32%. Huge difference. They would like to see more flexibility in the ability to acquire water. And that will be worked out, I think, over time. Another factor which has come into play is the overall conservation and less demand on the system. I first started when BOSCA was created, the big fear was 2018, when 184 MGD guarantee would no longer be in existence with San Francisco. Well, 2018 has come and gone because demand has come and gone. We have not utilizing anywhere near the water that was projected to be used when the major WISP program was done. San Francisco currently has about a $1.57 billion CapEx program to address issues. But there was a report recently that showed they would need an extraordinarily larger amount than that to address even climate change and sea level rise. So we'll see. It's a moving target, but on the whole, San Francisco is an incredibly robust system with 5 to 6 years of storage, which has a great redundancy. And they are at risk from administrative and legislative and judicial actions such as unimpaired flows, which would take those water rights by the state, according to Dennis Herrera, the new general manager, and make them secondary to the right, the now junior rights of the state and federal government to protect the Delta. There are risks. There's also a basic theme in California on Western water law that if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. That runs counter to our efforts in conservation. And I would encourage us to keep that in mind as we go in and spend money on various projects and look for ways that we can beneficially employ the water of San Francisco, because it really can be put at risk. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may, Director Weed, I appreciate that you have a much closer appreciation of the details given your role on the BOSCA board. I did want to just make one thing clear. You did mention that some wholesale customers had issues with their allocations that they would receive in a cutback situation. And I know that you're referring to current ongoing negotiations among the wholesale customers regarding that tier 2 calculation. So how that slice of water volume that's provided to wholesale customers in a cutback is divided among the wholesale customers. And just to be clear for the public that the WSA amendment that is before the board tonight is a different issue, and it was also negotiated with wholesale customers in discussions, but that's a separate negotiation that you're referring to.
But this ability to transfer runs parallel and could assist in the making the necessary adjustments for some of these other BOSCA members. Would it not?
Yes, but again, with it'll depend on the details, but yes, a customer's ISG volume currently is one of the many factors that goes into a tier 2 calculation as it currently exists. And depending on those negotiations, the wholesale agency's ISG could remain a factor in that calculation, correct?
Thank you.
Mr. Ash, I have one more question, please. When we were looking at the $5 billion investment, the CapEx investment that San Francisco made, our share of costs is 4%. So it's a $200 million impact back to ACWD, spread out over years, of course, in our rates. Is there any change in adopting these amendments to our share of future CapEx investments?
I don't believe so. I don't believe that's described at all directly in the WSA amendments that are before the board tonight. However, I will look into that issue a little closer to understand what you're talking about with the CapEx investments.
Yeah, if I might add just a little bit on that. SFPUC water is paid for on a per unit basis. The fixed charges we pay are pretty minimal in terms of the overall payments. So unless they had a change in their structure, we'll continue to pay them in accordance with the percentage of water consumption we utilize.
Yes, and for the recommendation I made to staff, I think it would be helpful to understand how San Francisco is financing their CapEx, because I think they were doing it with commercial paper for a good portion and then have gone to bonds. And so it'd be interesting just to know
Yeah, I believe their standard approach is that they issue short-term commercial paper that then gets converted to long-term revenue bonds.
Mhm. Thank you. A very good presentation, Mr. Ash.
Thank you. And people spend careers on the MSA, both here and at Hanson Bridget. Thank you. There's at this point then, what would be the appropriate action of the board?
I'll move the staff recommendation for this item.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any board comment to the motion? If not, roll call, please.
Director Sethi,
Yes.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Plum,
I,
and Weed.
Aye. Okay, if we've been at it now for almost 2 hours, if is anyone who needs a break, or can we go into reports?
Yes, let's take a 10-minute break.
All right, then we'll come back. Well, let's make it a little bit less than that, but you've got 8 minutes and we'll come back at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Thank you. Good reports. Thank you. We're now back in open session. It is 8 o'clock and go on to reports, which starts with board committee reports. Is there anyone who has a question or comment about the board committee items on the agenda? 6.1. If there are none, we can move then to operational reports, 6.2. Mr. Stevenson. Oh, wait a minute, we have a comment from a member of the public, Mr. Ken Nashimura.
Thank you. I'm kind of curious about both the distribution system hardness and also the water production report. I think the two could be related. I noticed that the hardness has now taken a tick towards 150 in large parts of the district. And I also noticed that the water production report for February had a much larger than expected production from the wells. And I'm curious if the two of those are tied together. And I also noted that the gross production is trending pretty high. And I think that could be related to the extended warm spell that we had in early February, but it doesn't look like we're anywhere close to our 15% cutback. Is that correct? Thanks.
Well, Mr. Stevenson, could you?
Yeah, certainly we're seeing demands that are higher than we would like right now, but I will turn it over to our Director of Operations and Maintenance, Mr. Kurt Ahrens, to respond.
Good evening. Yeah, I think the easiest way to explain the increase in hardness is SFPUC has just actually returned to Hetch Hetchy supply. They had a 90-day shutdown to work on their tunnel work. This is an annual process they go through. So while they have the Hetch Hetchy down for repairs and maintenance work, we're on their local supplies, which has a higher hardness. So when we're on local San Francisco supplies, the hardness does go up, and their supplies within increases our blender hardness. As far as the production, no major changes in our production facilities. For a while, we did reduce production at our TP2 water treatment plant because of manganese concerns. So that increased our blender a little bit, but the blender production rate is fairly well controlled by PFAS and hardness. So hopefully that explains the hardness numbers. If you have any other questions.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And just comment, they plan another 90-day shutdown plan next year. And then there's, I think, 120-day shutdowns the following years. And Mr. Ash may have additional information, but this will be an annual process we go through. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. If there are any comments or questions related to the other operational reports, members of the board, or none, Let's move then to staff presentations, which begins with OPEB. It's an interesting story. As listed at the end of last year.
An interesting and good news story. And to introduce that topic, I'll turn it over to our Director of Finance and Administration, John Wonderlich.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Members of the board and public, the district is required to complete an actuarial valuation of its retiree healthcare program every 2 years. And so we've contracted with McLeod Watts Consulting Actuaries to perform that analysis for us. And so here with us to present the results is Kevin Watts. And I will turn it over to him. And Kevin, if you want me to, I can share my screen, or you can go ahead and share your screen. All right, there we go.
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you share yours like we did in the last meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the report on the requirement every 2 years to do a new valuation, which we did as of 6/30/2021. We can go to the next slide. So in this presentation, we'll review the OPEB benefits that are provided, give you a summary of the participants in the plan, present the valuation results, and then 2 different types of contributions that we calculate as part of the actuarial valuation, and then give a summary by showing you the funding progress since the last valuation. Next slide. So the OPEB benefits can just generally be thought about in terms of 4 different tiers of employees. A process looks like it was initiated in 2009 to start requiring longer service periods to earn the benefit. That was in tier 2. Another similar process occurred for employees hired before 2019, after 2009, where they were required to perform longer service to get the benefit. The benefit was also adjusted. And finally, for everybody hired after 2019, they'll get the PIMCA minimum benefit, which for 2022 was $149 per month towards their medical coverage. Next slide. So for dental and vision, for everybody hired after 2009, the district doesn't pay anything. For those hired before that, there was 100% paid. And then life insurance, a similar story, no death benefit for employees hired after 3/31/2009, and then a nominal benefit for employees prior to that. Next slide. So over the 2-year period, from 2019 through 2021, the number of active employees who were reported has increased by 13, from 203 to 216, and retirees have gone up by 3. So a total of 16 participants have increased over the 2 years. And then down on the bottom block of numbers, you can see how they break down by tier. And the change on the far right is the kind of the interesting one, because you can see that the number as the older employees who are in part of the older tiers, 1, 2, and 3 retire, those numbers are going to be going down. So we saw tier 1, we have 5 less active employees, 2 more retirees, and then a similar story for the other tiers. But all the new employees that have come in, 27, are in tier 4. Next slide. So as part of the valuation, the heart of it is to do a projection of what we expect as future benefit payments to be given to participants. So this chart shows a couple of different kinds of benefits that are going to be paid out. One is an explicit payment. That would be what you would think about as terms of giving somebody a payment towards their medical premium. And then there's an implicit payment that we calculate that is an estimate of how much of the premiums that are being paid for active employees are really skewed towards retiree benefits. And so between the 2 of them, you can see the story is we're moving from about $3 million payments in total per year now up to just over $6 million in the next 20 years. And then it'll level off there for a decade and then start trending down as retirees pass away and the benefits go away. Something that's important is this is only for existing employees and retirees. So as new participants come in, we would expect this graph to not go down as much, obviously. So next slide. So the valuation that we performed, again, it was on 6/30/2021. The accrued liability as of that date was $2.2 million higher than the valuation in 2019. But one of the biggest story, obviously, is that the market value of assets went from 30.8 million to 47.5 million. So there's an increase of 16 million, almost $17 million in the assets in the plan. So that the unfunded liability really went down significantly. So we went from 28 million in 2019 to just shy of 14 million in 2021. It was a significant drop. Next slide. So part of the valuation is one of the things we'll do is calculate the contributions that we're expecting to, is targeting to be made to the trust by the district. One of the contributions is called our target funding contribution. That was the policy set up by the district, whereby they want to go from the current level of unfunded liability, which is 13.8 million, down to no unfunded liability by 2032. And so to do that, we do a projection and make some estimates of what contributions will achieve that. And at the lower left, you can see that the target funding contributions for 2022 and 2023 are right at 4.6 million. And then in 2024, it would drop to 2.3 million and then grow each year after that by 3%. The district gets credit for a contribution anytime they make a direct payment to a retiree. And then they also get an implicit subsidy credit, which is that estimate of how much they're paying towards retiree benefits in the form of active premiums. And then any direct contributions to the trust. Next slide. Another contribution that we calculate is called the actuarially determined contribution. It's an accounting idea from GASB 75. It's essentially a long-term contribution rate that we calculate. You have to put it in your financial reports. The contribution is calculated as a normal cost, which is just the payments or the value of benefits that are being earned by active employees in a year. And then a payment for the unfunded liability. That was the $13.8 million. You make a payment each year to reduce that. And then the sum of those two things with interest is called an actuarially determined contribution. In 2022, that number is 2.8 million. The contribution is calculated based on 6.75% discount rate, which is the expected long-term return that we're getting from your trust managers. Next slide. So in total, I mean, this kind of shows the punchline of where you are as of 2021. You've been making steady progress since 2011 in reducing your unfunded liability. So the funded ratio, that black line, has been ticking up, in really good steps since 2011. But then you can see that it really went up significantly since the 2019 valuation, where you increased it almost like 23%, 25%, that number, if I can see that, yeah. And with that, I'll take any questions.
All right. Let me see if there's any member of the public that had a comment or question. I see none. Let's move then to members of the board. This was briefed in the Finance Committee several weeks ago. It's positive. Director Sethi, did you have any comment?
I only wanted to say that, people in the public don't realize all the hard work that our staff has done, and in particular, two successive boards here, where we really made a commitment over a decade ago to pay down our OPEB obligations. And you can see from the one chart from how very low we were in our coverage all the way up to the present year. We have made tremendous progress. And I think everybody should be applauded for, it starts with a commitment from the board, but also all the recommendations of staff and our financial advisors and everybody helping us out. And I also want to caution us here. I'm hoping that we don't repeat history, because the board of directors had made a similar commitment back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And by 2008, we were in a really healthy position on pension costs and OPEB. And then the recession hit, and within 2 years, we were back to square one practically. And so we need to continue the effort right now in advance funding our obligations so that we get, as close to 100% as we can. Thank you.
Okay. I would note that in CalPERS in particular, we were incredibly well funded in 2008, about 2003, and by 2008, the bottom fell out. But for OPEB, you get down a pay as you go. So building up the reserve is something we're working on, starting from a very, very low base.
Hey, Director Weed, I can barely hear you. Something's wrong. You're really muffled.
Okay, I'll see if I can speak up and find some noise in the background within the system. If someone has their, please put on your mute.
I think, Mr. Watts, if you can mute for a moment, please.
All right, thank you. I think we're there now. My point was that OPEB, we really started from scratch. We built it up, and we're doing well. We picked 2032 for both CalPERS and OPEB. My thought, was there not some discussion and thought about moving that date up now, given the success of the past year? And so that we would maintain the level of payments that we have done over the past several years would result in a quicker payoff, particularly of OPEB.
Yeah, so I think staff will come with some formal recommendations as part of the budget process later this spring. But I think, what we'll probably suggest is that we maintain the currently planned level of contributions. And to the extent all assumptions are realized, that would allow us to be funded sooner. To the extent we have some bad years over the next few years, though, maintaining those high level of contributions would then, put us in a better position to still achieve our goal of full funding by 2032, and without having to kind of swing a pendulum back and forth where, contributions go up significantly one year and down significantly the next year as funding changes. And in particular, the way things are shaping up so far this fiscal year, we may be giving back some of the gains that were made last fiscal year anyway. So it may be particularly prudent to maintain some additional contributions.
Now, actuaries have talked about a corridor of 80 to 120, or again 90 to 110 to consider full funding, and with 100 being the median of that corridor. We're still below the 80% minimum threshold, are we not? And so would that not support continuing the current pace of investment?
Yeah, I mean, our target as staff is to get 100% funded. We don't view getting to 80% as really accomplishing our objective. We want to get to 100%, and so we'll be again coming with some formal recommendations as part of the budget process, but I would anticipate at this point that we'll probably recommend that we maintain the current contribution levels.
All right. And with the hope of getting AAA for Moody's.
Well, I think we have to make California drought proof and earthquake proof before we can accomplish that.
All right, good point. Thank you. All right, is there any other comment from members of the board? Thank you for the report. It's always good to have good news. Our next item would be the, let's see, we go with staff presentations. We have the item Niles Cone groundwater conditions and survey report.
Yes, thank you, President Weed. And this will be a continuation of our Replenishment Assessment Act process. And I'll turn it over to our Director of Water Resources, Ms. Laura Heides, to get us going here.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. The Replenishment Assessment Act of Alameda County Water District requires the board to order an engineering survey and report on groundwater conditions, which was ordered by the board on November 17th, 2021, and is the first step in the process to establish a replenishment assessment for the next fiscal year. Recommendations in the survey report on groundwater conditions are based on projected activities needed to sustain the groundwater basin in fiscal year 2022-23, with consideration of groundwater levels and quality documented in the 2021 groundwater monitoring report. Tonight, Mike Hallowell, Senior Engineer, is presenting information on the Niles Cone groundwater conditions and survey report to assist the board in its review of the two reports received by the board on February 10th, 2022. Eileen Chen, Groundwater Resources Scientist and author of the Groundwater Monitoring Report, is also here tonight. This is Mike's 31st year authoring the survey report and Eileen's 18th year authoring the Groundwater Monitoring Report. I'd like to thank them both for their dedication to these efforts. I'd also like to acknowledge Michelle Myers, Groundwater Resources Manager, who is also here in support of tonight's item. And before we begin, I'd like to note that tonight's presentation happens to coincide quite appropriately with National Groundwater Awareness Week, taking place March 6th through 12th, which is an annual observance established to highlight the responsible development, management, and use of groundwater and to encourage yearly water well testing and well maintenance, something very important to us here. And now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Hallowell to make his presentation.
Good evening, members of the board, executive staff, members of the public. While yours truly will talk through the slides, Ms. Chen and Ms. Myers will help me out when we get to Q&A. Next slide. And next slide, please. Tonight, we'll hit the key points in the groundwater monitoring report and the survey report. We'll check in on basin conditions and then pivot to finances as we lay out the rationale behind staff's recommended rate of replenishment assessment this coming fiscal year. The recommendations in the survey report were developed with close coordination between the Groundwater Resources Division and both the Water Supply and Planning Division and the Finance Department. Staff in all four departments contributed valuable information. Next slide. We hope the board and public will find tonight's presentation helpful as we look forward to the public hearing coming up on April 12th. After the hearing, the final business for the board for the year on replenishment assessment is to make formal findings, including what the replenishment assessment rate will be in FY 22-23. The findings are communicated through resolutions. The schedule's been set to enable the board to adopt the resolutions on the same evening of April 12th, immediately following the hearing. However, should the board find itself needing additional time to consider public comment, the Replenishment Assessment Act would allow the board to continue the hearing provided it is closed on or before the first Tuesday in May and the resolutions adopted no later than the second Tuesday in May. Next slide. By basin, we of course mean the Niles Cone. The northwest trending Hayward Fault actually impedes lateral groundwater flow, subdividing the Niles Cone into two subbasins, the above Hayward Fault and below Hayward Fault. Next slide. As we look at the alluvium in cutaway view, the fault is depicted as a vertical dashed line. To the right or east, the above Hayward Fault subbasin contains essentially a single thick aquifer. To the west, the below Hayward Fault features a stack of four principal aquifers. By order of depth, they are the Newark, Centerville, Fremont, and Deep aquifers. The Newark aquifer hydraulically interacts with San Francisco Bay depicted as a green puddle to the upper left, like a green puddle. From the early 1900s into the 1960s, the basin was overdrafted. Newark aquifer well levels were mostly below sea level, enabling bay water to enter the basin and migrate inland. En route, brackish water made its way down and through natural weaknesses in the aquitards and abandoned wells and impacted the Seminole Fremont and deep aquifers. Next slide. By 1962, the water level in the Newark aquifer near the Hayward Fault was about 70 feet below sea level. And next slide. Brackish water had enveloped about 60 square miles in the Newark aquifer. Next slide. The early 1960s, however, marked a turning point as the district gained legal and institutional means to put into place substantive sustainability measures and potable water contracts, augmentation of artificial recharge facilities, and with the Replenishment Assessment Act, metering of wells, and a replenishment fee structure. Critical other programs would follow in later decades. Next slide. In response, groundwater levels rebounded with the Newark aquifer returning above sea level by 1972, restoring the natural bayward flow direction. The Newark has essentially been above sea level ever since, and much salt has been exported. Next slide. The status of legacy saltwater intrusion is updated through semi-annual basin-wide monitoring events. Our technicians do excellent work in the field that enable these updates. Next slide. These are the chloride contours for the Newark aquifer as of last fall, our most recent monitoring event. Next slide. Given the current position of the 250 milligram per liter contour, we estimate about 16 square miles of the Newark aquifer have been restored from brackish to fresh water. Next slide. To confirm reduction in salt is ongoing, we've calculated recent trends for chloride in individual monitoring wells and plotted each trend value at the location of its corresponding well. Next slide. Because concentrations in any given well can fluctuate up and down from one year to the next, trending over a multi-year period is a good way to infer how water quality is responding to current operations and any natural phenomena. The overwhelming majority of wells are showing decreasing trends as evidenced by the negative numbers. Next slide. Then we come to the Seminole Fremont aquifer. Here are the current chlorides. Next slide. Like with the Newark, we've plotted chloride trends. They appear to be decreasing in a large majority of wells, including the area of apparent increase in brackish water since 1962. Next slide. Lagging the Newark, water quality in the Seminole Fremont probably didn't start to get better until the mid-1970s. So backed by popular demand, we've performed the brackish water mass calculation to compare with 1974, but we do urge a little caution with these numbers. And next slide, please. Now onto the deep aquifer. Here are the current chlorides. Next slide. The band of brackish water in the Northwest was not discovered until 2006 when we installed then new monitoring wells. Without a reliable map of the footprint of brackish water in the deep, at least as far back as the 1970s or 80s, we hesitate to try to compare current and long ago plume masses as we try to do for the Seminole Fremont. But we can turn to data in individual monitoring wells, and the preponderance of trends being negative gives us comfort that water quality in the deep is on the right track like the other aquifers. So overall, a good news story on legacy saltwater intrusion. We see that we're in an era of long-term management with our current operations. Mitigation of legacy saltwater intrusion today is mostly passive. If chlorides today were less than 250 milligrams per liter throughout the Niles cone, we'd likely be doing the same activities that are presently helping to reduce chloride. Specifically, next slide. The desal facility will continue to be operated, but maybe more as a demineralization facility. Next slide. We would still seal abandoned wells. Next slide. And continue to divert fresh water into our recharge ponds to maintain well levels as appropriate for this coastal aquifer system that we have. Besides chloride contours, water level contours are also generated as part of the basin-wide monitoring events. However, for quick checks on how much water we have stored in the basin, we rely heavily on two wells, the above Hayward Fault and below Hayward Fault main indicator wells, in which water levels are measured weekly. And you can see these two wells plotted here on the map. Next slide. Here are the levels versus time in the above Hayward Fault well. And next slide. The below Hayward Fault, Newark Aquifer Forebay indicator well. Blue dots are actual measurements, and the red line is the model simulation. Model predicted levels out through 2023. Next slide. Are consequential of our assumptions. Last December, we worked on this part of the survey report. Subnormal rainfall this winter, the drought ending this coming September, but conservation continuing into 2023. If these assumptions are mostly realized, resulting groundwater levels should be reasonably okay. However, supplemental water may ultimately be brought in if needed, depending on real-time conditions. Next slide. Even if we don't import water next fiscal year, we'll still operate facilities to impound and divert natural runoff into the recharge ponds, the cost of which is represented in the dark blue slice of the pie chart here. The other slices relate to imported water contract costs, CIP, and ongoing protection, management, and monitoring of the basin and watershed. Now, with the survey report, there are no proposed new expenditures. This merely reflects the groundwater basin side of the current budget. As such, items for the distribution system are not included herein, and we discern revenue the same way. Next slide. If we were a replenishment-only district, our revenue streams would be replenishment assessment, the 1% tax, the state water project override tax, and grants for eligible groundwater projects. For the Replenishment Assessment Act, the proposed rate adjustment applies to groundwater produced for purposes other than agricultural and municipal recreation. To be fair to private well operators that would pay at this rate, we evaluate groundwater pumped into ACWD's distribution system using the same proposed rate, $513 per acre foot, and then include the resulting $7.8 million in the revenue stream. When we add in the rest of the anticipated revenue, we project a total of $25.4 million. Now, this is just one forecast year. Next slide. In a multi-year cash flow, the historical part of this shows that actual revenue has met actual cost, not per se in any single year, but instead over the long term. We don't have an accumulated shortfall or unreasonably high ending balance up through FY 2021. With the goal of the proposed rate working to continue this trend, we take into account projected cost data among other considerations. The cost line after FY 22-23 represents the numbers that we have available, such as the 25-year CIP. But we do recognize uncertainty at this juncture in time. The reliability of each of the district's sources of supply, including local water for the groundwater basin, is under long-term threat due to climate change, other environmental factors, and regulatory pressure. As new information comes to light on feasibility and cost options to address this threat and decisions are made, this long-term future cost line may change. The proposed 2.6% adjustment in the RA rate, replenishment assessment rate, would maintain flexibility for revenue to stay on track to meet a range of plausible long-range future cost scenarios while promoting moderation of future replenishment assessment rate adjustments. Because replenishment assessment rates are considered by the board every year, course corrections can easily be made over time. Next slide. In 1997, after the Quarry Pits Rehabilitation Project, the district did not raise rates for 10 years. After we got clarity on the cost to upgrade recharge facilities to comply with the Endangered Species Act, rates had to catch up even with grants. Had we known as far back as 1997, rate increases could have been more gradual, such as the 3.5% per year. Next slide. Two other California water districts operating groundwater basins in urban settings with artificial recharge and other groundwater programs similar to those of ACWD are the Santa Clara Valley Water District and Orange County Water District. Every basin has its unique issues, so I don't want to overstate the comparison. The match in proposed rates between Valley Water's Zone W5 and ACWD is purely a coincidence. We completed our survey report before their numbers became available. With next slide, please. With this shot taken from a 7:37 on February 21st, we'll leave you with it with this and take any questions.
Do we have any comments from the public? Questions? I see none. Bring it to the board. Is there any member of the board who wishes to comment on this?
I do.
Please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hallowell, for once again, always giving the most interesting presentation of the year. So if we look at things over 2 centuries, and I think I remember you saying this before, it was a man-made problem that we overdrafted our system between the gold rush period and 1962 when we got serious about trying to reverse the trend. And I think you mentioned that it might be all the way out to 2070 before we get the salinity plume closer to 880 away from where it originated in 62 on the Hayward Fault, pretty much Mission Boulevard. So it was 1 century of damage and it's another century of cleanup work, isn't it?
Yes, but we've learned to live with it. So there's really no, shall we say, actions that are devoted, uniquely to salt, except what's left of the ARP program. The fact that once we started up desal phase 2, that pretty much took up or met the objectives of the ARP program. So it's a matter of maintaining levels as we have to do as a coastal aquifer with the coastal aquifer system we have, and then with desal phase 2, we're really fulfilling the objectives of ARP. So yes, it's cleanup going on and it's taking time. It's occurring passively, but we're kind of past that period where we were in crisis mode and we're scrambling and all that. So, and that's why we had that slide in slide 10 where we're in this period of long-term management. But yes, it's going to be it's a long gradual process, and it's going to be with us for a long time. We're always going to be, it's going to take a long time, but there is gradual improvement. It's accumulated improvement, cumulative. So that's probably one way of thinking about it.
I just have one question, which is related to the desal plant. So we're nearing 20 years since phase 1 on the plant. Is there any noticeable, detectable acceleration in cleaning up the salinity plume, or has that just been a substitute for the prior wells that we had?
Yes, it's been, it did. I think that, well, we could look at trends and try to, look back before 2003 and 2010, but with desal phase 2, what that did was it really increased the amount of pumping of brackish water. And really what we're talking about is with desal, the desal supply wells is cleaning up water that's trapped in the Seminole Fremont aquifer. It's probably having some benefit as well on the deep, just because of the interconnection with the deep and the Seminole and kind of the upconing that's happening. So it's those two deeper aquifers where are really being helped by it, and it helped because, especially with desal phase 2, when we increased the basically have a constant amount of pumping of about 11,000 acre feet a year. So at that volume, before that, the volume wasn't anything near that, maybe 3,000 or whatever. And it was all depending on when we had water available. So, and then on top of that, we've, the Maui well field has dropped in some production. So that enabled, a little bit more capture zone of the plume, if you will, in the Central Fremont aquifer to move toward the well. So I see that these, the trends in the Central Fremont, some of them are pretty impressive on some of these individual wells. And so, yes, I think the desal facilities had a very beneficial effect.
Thank you very much. Are we going to see you around for a 30-second of your presentation?
Oh, I think so. Yes, I think you can count on that. Maybe a couple more. Who knows? Maybe like Tom Brady. I'll keep going for a while.
All right. We wish for it. Thank you.
I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back like Tom Brady or anything. That's a different level of, achievement, but just in longevity, that's it.
Thank you.
I think this is Director Gunther. I'm not so certain that you're not in that same category. Certainly when it comes to groundwater people, you're the Tom Brady. And I appreciate to hear that you're going to be around for at least another year or two. Look forward to this report every year. It's fascinating. It's deep. It's, inquisitive. It's got everything that, well, the groundwater guy would love. Some fascinating stuff here, and always appreciate what you're doing and how you've done it. And so don't sell yourself too short there on Tom Brady or groundwater. I'll tell you. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wong, Dr. Murray, any comment? Let me make a note that an interesting comment that the groundwater is improving to the point where the desal plant in Newark may at some point become a demineralization facility. The chloride will have been addressed. Is that a fair statement? And do we have any timeline on that?
Well, I think it'll still be, the chlorides there will still be above 250 for a while. I think it would be decades before that were to get down to that. Again, we could take a closer look and sort of see trends in the Bellflower, Farwell wells and so on. But, if they did get down to, 250, it's not like turning off a light bulb or something or a switch. It's just that it's still, the chloride component of the total dissolved solids would just be below a potable water standard. Well, would meet a potable water standard. And what you'd be dealing with then is trying to get total dissolved solids and hardness and any other minerals in a quality that would continue to operate like it's doing with reverse osmosis. And it would be needed because you would still have that mineral content. So instead of blending, we've got desal, so it really works great.
Is it fair to say that chlorides of under 500 is water that can be used for irrigation?
Well, let's see. I'll ask if Ms. Myers wants to or Ms. Chen have any thoughts on that.
Let me give you
I
follow up on
can take a crack at it, Mike. I do know that a lot of landscape is very intolerant to higher levels of chloride concentrations, and I do believe 500 is too high. I think it's, I'd have to go back. I've looked into it about a decade ago, so it's been a while. But I do know that based on that research, I remember that for the most part, it wasn't going to like a lot of salt.
Okay. Well, I note that in agriculture, 500 parts per million, even up to 1,000, is considered to be a usable and productive water supply. But it strikes me that at $500 an acre foot for being able to take water directly out of the ground and apply it for irrigation, compared to $3,000 an acre foot water that we're sending through our treatment plants and delivering it. That there's some really lost economic opportunities there to utilize our existing resources. And I believe we had a pilot project out near Pacific Commons that was going to take well water and use it in purple pipe to do irrigation. We put in the purple pipe, which we'll probably never and should never see recycled water, but it would do very well with raw well water at a small fraction of the cost. So, thank you. Okay, do we have any more in the? Well, thank you very much for your report. It's always informative. Okay, next we would then go to general manager reports, beginning with the update on COVID-19.
Well, thank you, President Weed. And I realize now I should not have agendized myself to follow the Tom Brady of groundwater because especially with a topic like COVID-19. However, I will say that things are definitely looking up. We've had, the Omicron variant has come and it has gone now. And we've had only 2 additional positive cases since my last report on February 10. And we are not having any significant operational issues as a result of cases currently. So that's great news. And also good news, we're continuing to trend upward in our rate of vaccination amongst employees. We're at about 84% now. So things continue to look up and we're looking forward optimistically. And a few things are changing. So you may know that the governor signed an executive order on February 28th that removed the state requirement that unvaccinated workers wear masks indoors. And Alameda County came into alignment with that too. So we changed our own COVID workplace protocols. And as of this past Monday, masks have no longer been required by employees or members of the public inside ACWD facilities, including our headquarters facility. However, masks are still recommended by health authorities. And so we continue to provide employees and the public with masks as requested or as needed for their convenience. With regard to reofficing, we continue to plan for a general reofficing of staff in April for those folks who have been working remotely for nearly 2 years now, or about 2 years, in fact. And we're doing the reofficing in a phased approach, a phased way with different divisions and work groups reofficing at different times in sort of a staggered way to provide for an orderly resuming of office work. And again, with regard to board meetings, we continue to plan for in-person board meetings. And we plan to have our next regular board meeting on April 12th to be held in person. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. And also our all of our committee meetings starting in April with the April 5th Ops and Water Quality Committee meeting and our April 6th Engineering and Technology Committee meeting. We're planning to hold those here at headquarters in person. All of these meetings, both board meetings and committee meetings, we're continuing to plan for those meetings to be held in a hybrid way. So that means that the public could still choose to participate virtually on Zoom, just as they've been participating for the last 2 years. We plan to have that continue, just to expand opportunities for the public to participate in those meetings. So with regard to attendance at those meetings by directors, we plan to continue to operate under AB 361 as long as the conditions that are defined in AB 361 continue. And that means there has to be a proclaimed state of emergency in effect. And that means health officials have to continue to recommend measures to promote social distancing. And so if those conditions still exist, members of the board could continue to participate remotely on Zoom in any of these public meetings. Although we still recommend that the board participate in person. Staff will be present in person in all of these meetings, and it would be great for the board to join us in person. But that opportunity still exists as long as we're still operating under AB 361. And of course, as mentioned, there are conditions that still need to be met in order for that to happen. So that could change at any time. We understand that this transition from remote participation in these public meetings to in-person participation, that's a transition for not only for staff, but also for the board, and we get that. And so we'll just ask you to be on the lookout for invitations to additional opportunities to come back to the boardroom, get reacquainted with your equipment and the boardroom itself over the next few weeks. So you'll be receiving some information about that shortly. And I'll pause there for any questions or comments.
Do we have any comments, first of all, from the public? I see none. Any comments from the board? Thank you. Looking forward.
Okay.
Let me make one quick comment. I may be out of state but calling in on next April, on the meeting in April. And I propose handing the gavel to the next in line, the Vice President, Mr. Director Sethi, should he be here, because it's best to chair a meeting in person than trying to do it remotely when you have an in-house in-person meeting. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, the good news is we'll have an actual gavel to hold and to use. Okay. Well, I'm very much looking forward to resuming those in-person meetings. That concludes my own general manager's report. We have 3 additional general manager's reports, but I'll hand it over to Laura Heides to brief us on the drought.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. I have just a few quick updates on the slides that were shared with drought information. So next slide, please. This is our typical local precipitation graph that shows how much rain we've received at the blending facility. We did measure 1/10 of an inch of rain at the blending facility gauge in March, but that's not much. Brings our cumulative total for the year to 11.5 inches to date. This puts us at around 80% of average local rainfall for this time of year and 63% of an average annual local rainfall total. You can see that if we continue with the dry conditions, we will finish the year solidly in a dry state in that beige shaded area. Next slide, please. And this is the typical Northern Sierra precipitation chart that we look at. The blue line indicates what we've received this year in this watershed. As of today, March 10th, the Northern Sierra 8 station index shows 32.2 inches of precipitation, an increase of 3/10 of an inch since last week when this was published in the board information. Next slide, please. Statewide conditions remain in severe drought. The U.S. Drought Monitor map on the left was updated on March 8th, but it remains similar to looking like this map from March 1st. Again, much of the state in severe drought. And as of today, on the right, the reservoir conditions map, Lake Oroville, which feeds the State Water Project, is currently 46% full, which is 71% of average for this time of year. And San Luis Reservoir, also a big part of our State Water Project deliveries, is 44% full, or 53% of average for this time of year. Next slide, please. So the NOAA forecast for the next 2 weeks show increased probabilities for below normal precipitation. You can see that on the left with the beige shading over our state. And the seasonal outlook for the rest of the rain season is also leaning, looking like it's leaning toward increased probabilities for below normal precipitation in the months ahead. So we're not anticipating a lot more precipitation this year. Next slide, please. This is our monthly customer demand chart that I know the board is accustomed to orient you. The orange line is the 2020 demand pattern throughout the calendar year. The red line is the 2021 pattern, and purple dashed line that you see is the target pattern that we're looking at to achieve 15% conservation over the course of the year. 2022, January and February to date are shown in the blue. And you can see that while in January we were fairly close to our target, in February we have seen an uptick. We were at about 31.9 MGD this past month, very close to what we saw in February 2020, and we are above our target for the month. As we continue to have dry weather, encouraging customers to conserve water where they can and limit their irrigation to be in line with the district's ordinance will be key to meeting our goal. Next slide, please. So just a few additional updates to share. 2022 was the driest recorded January-February period in state history. March 1st, the snowpack was only at 63% of average to date, so it has declined over those dry months. And I think at this point, it's safe to say that a third drought year is here. The district's mandatory restrictions remain in effect in order to meet our 15% system-wide reduction target, including a limitation to watering just 1 day per week in the current March through May period. And that's something we do want to emphasize and ensure customers are sticking to that 1 day per week. Customers can visit, as always, acwd.org/drought for more information. And that concludes my update on this item. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from members of the board or the public? There being none, thank you very much for your report. We have our next, which is a potential dry year transfer with Contra Costa.
Yes, Director Weed, and that will also be presented by our Director of Water Resources, Laura Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. I have just a short update on a potential dry year water transfer opportunity that staff has been exploring with Contra Costa Water District. Taking advantage of their own in-delta diversions and available storage capacity in Los Vaqueros Reservoir, Contra Costa has acquired a water transfer supply option from the Yuba County Water Agency, including provisions for its resale to regional partners. This opportunity offers a dry year supply, including or to participating agencies, but also supports numerous regional concepts actively being pursued by the Los Vaqueros partners, as well as the Bay Area Regional Reliability or BAR partners. The supply is a unique spring supply, potentially available starting in April, although not guaranteed. To participate, the district would need to enter into an agreement with Contra Costa by the end of March. Staff has been collaborating with Contra Costa and evaluating this opportunity and believes that it is low risk, offers a good quantity of water, and will be available at a competitive dry year cost. Additionally, this potential transfer could open the door for a future exchange pilot with the San Francisco PUC, as currently being studied by the BAR partners, and thus provide additional future benefits to the district and the region. This water is not guaranteed to be available, but staff believes pursuing the potential water transfer for up to 5,000 acre-feet of water supply that would come from the north of the Delta is worthwhile given current severe drought conditions, as it will help to offset the draw on existing reserves, bolster supplies for this year, and ensure we have additional water to carry over into 2023. Details and costs are still being worked out, but this is a very fast-moving opportunity, and we anticipate bringing an action item to the planned March 31st board workshop to consider approval of an agreement with Contra Costa for this transfer before the April diversion season would begin. We anticipate this could be up to a $5 million cost if the water is available, and we expect to have more information and details to share at the March 31st meeting. So that concludes my brief update on this item.
Quick question, if I might have, because others, would this be characterized as federal water or state water?
Good question. Those details are all still being worked out. The water would be purchased and then it would take some additional agreements and transfers to get it to us. So I don't know that we're ready to put a name on what that water would ultimately look like, but we will be able to share more details on that at the March 31st workshop.
Great, thank you. All right. There are no other questions. So let's move to the next staff report, which is the State Water Contractors Dry Year Transfer Program update.
Obviously, we're in a drought, and this item will also be covered by Ms. Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. As reported last month, the district is continuing to pursue potential participation in the State Water Contractors Dry Year Transfer Program. Participants recently executed participation agreements with the state water contractors for administration of the program, and the district will be submitting a deposit of $32,500 shortly toward administrative expenses. A term sheet has been circulated to prospective sellers, and a meeting is scheduled for next week for participants to receive an update on any potential interest from prospective sellers. If water is secured through the program, staff would be returning to the board in the April to May timeframe with more information and to request authorization to execute any water purchase agreements. And we'll continue to provide updates on this opportunity and the other one that I mentioned earlier. And that concludes my update.
Thank you. That completes the general manager reports. So we'll move on to reports from board members, directors' comments, reports, meetings attended, and agenda item request, beginning with Director Gunther on his CalDSAL attendance.
Good evening. Little disadvantage. I left my notes at home. I'm on the road actually this evening, but the conference was actually pretty interesting. It was virtual. I did attend virtually. Somewhat on the technical side, which was actually nice. One of the items they did discuss was it was interesting. They were looking at actual studies on. There's a lot of speculation on discharge and the discharge salinity effects of animal life and how it affects the ocean. And they had some animal studies which were very fascinating and what areas it would affect and possibly not affect. And basically the study was kind of saying, we're being a little overcautious here. That was my takeaway from it. The other one was, maybe you had to be an ocean engineer to be appreciative of this one, but flow patterns of brine. And now this evening, I can't remember how they changed it. I can't remember if it was the angle or the method, but the volume. And they actually were filming the flow patterns in basic of the brine being discharged. And it was doing things, it was fanning in manners that are not really noted as being what you would use for data to impact brine discharge. Once again, favorable to the water industry. It'll be interesting to see where these go. I don't know if they'll be accepted. They looked very good to me. It was primarily, everything was really centered around saltwater projects. Texas was involved. They have one Texas rep there, and they have their own issues there in Texas, which is fascinating. You would think Texas wouldn't have issues, but no, they have issues as well as we do. And it's kind of nice to hear that other states have problems too. One area that I did not realize, and makes a lot of sense, was the concept of dual purposing nuclear facilities and whether they're commissioned or not. Nuclear plants, you know, the ocean ones draw from the ocean. And if one could utilize that water and those flows, you can almost tap onto it with a saltwater desal plant. you still have brine issues you have to deal with, but once again, you go back to those other studies, maybe not as bad. But there's been quite a bit of looking at that down south, and I think we may actually see some flourishing on a couple of those projects. Sadly, there was a test project down south again, and I can't remember, it was a harbor project, and they were doing, it was a test, and they wanted to test certain intakes, and they had everybody lined up, and they lost their grant money because one state agency said no. And the irony was, it was like, if I remember correctly, it was like state lands. I've never even heard of these guys. Objected, and they lost their grant money for a project that would have gotten us some really good data. It's kind of sad. They didn't really go into why that group, that agency, I'm not sure they know, but subsequently lost their grant money. So it was a really good conference, somewhat technical, but there was a lot of good data, and I hope we continue to press ahead with it. I think they're finding the impacts, they're actually getting out there now, and instead of assuming that, you know, all wildlife on the ocean bed is going to be destroyed by discharge, that perhaps not. I'll leave it at that for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Since we have no other items, we now have a closed session on our agenda. Are we in need of a closed session?
Great. If you'd like, President Weed, I'll take us into the closed session.
Sure.
Great. It is now 9:05, and the board is going to convene into closed session for item 8.1 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9 subsection D1, conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, name of case, Bonnie Kessner and Andrea McCartney Page, individually and on behalf of all others similarly situated and on behalf of the general public et al. Versus City of Santa Clara et al. Case number 20CV364054. And for item 8.2, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9 subsection D2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one potential case. And we can now convene into closed session.
Right, thank you. I'd like to thank the staff members for staying with us until 9 p.m. I appreciate it. Your efforts are appreciated.
Looks like we're back.
President Weed, I'd happily bring us back if you'd like. All right, he's on mute, but I think I saw his lips say, please do. It is now 10:10 and the board convening closed session for two items. For item 8.1, is pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9 subsection D1, conference with legal counsel, existing litigation. Name of case, Bonnie Kessner and Andrea McCartney Page, individually and on behalf of all others similarly situated, and on behalf of the general public et al. Versus City of Santa Clara et al. Case number 20CV364054. And this is the report out for open session. As to Alameda County Water District, the case has been settled, with the case against Alameda County Water District being dismissed without prejudice and with the district waiving costs. For item 8.2, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9 subsection D2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one potential case. No action was taken in the closed session with regard to 8.2, and that concludes the open session reports. So it's back to you, President Weed.
President, we're not hearing you. It doesn't look like you're muted, but I think you might be suggesting that we may be adjourning. Still not hearing you. President Weed, can you hear us? Well, Vice President Sethi, I think maybe in the case of a situation where the president is unable to run the meeting, perhaps you can take us to adjournment.
I think Vice President Sethi is muted. Still muted.
Well, you're muted too.
Hey, John.
Am I muted too?
Oh, now you're there.
Okay,
Good now.
so I will adjourn the meeting. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Good night.